Support for this episode comes from the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. The Diller Awards honor up to 15 Jewish teens from across the United States with an award of $36,000 each to recognize their impact and leadership to repair the world. Nominate a teen leader today, or they can apply directly by January 8th, 2026. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 506. Judaism Unbound's first guest, 500 episodes later. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're taking a break, I should say an interlude, from our series exploring Jewish music. But don't worry, we'll be back to the music soon. We're starting something today that we've been really looking forward to. Today's the first of a bunch of episodes we plan to do over the course of this year in honor of reaching our 500th episode milestone and approaching Judaism Unbound's 10th anniversary. We're inviting back some of our earliest guests and collaborators to check in with them, hear about how their work has evolved, and we'll also do a little bit of reflecting together on what Judaism Unbound has become and what it's given rise to. Of course, it makes sense that our first guest in this occasional series should be our very first guest ever on the podcast. And also, by the way, our most frequently returning guest, not to mention a dear friend, a line thinker, frequent collaborator, and all-around smart and wise human being, Benay Lappe. This is a good opportunity to remind you that there's a new podcast that's joined the Judaism Unbound family of podcasts a few months ago. It's called The Oral Talmud, and it's co-hosted by our guest today, Benay Lappe, along with, checks notes, me, Dan Liebenson. The podcast explores the Talmud through the traditionally radical lens pioneered by Benay Lappe, and we read Talmudic texts in order to excavate the radical roots of Judaism. If you like Judaism Unbound, we think you'll like the Oral Talmud. And if you don't like Judaism Unbound, you've probably listened this far in because you love Benay Lappe. So you'll probably like the Oral Talmud too. Check it out wherever you listen to podcasts. And now here's a little bit more background on Benay Lappe, although she really needs no introduction to the Judaism Unbound audience. Benay Lappe is the founder and Rosh Yeshiva of Svara, a traditionally radical yeshiva. She is famous for her crash theory of Judaism, which we discussed with her in episode 3 of Judaism Unbound when she was our very first guest and helped us set the tone for this podcast. Benay Lappe is a truly incredible Talmud teacher. Her Svara method has revolutionized the study of Talmud, and her pioneering work in reading the Talmud and all of Judaism through a queer lens truly shifted Judaism on its axis and has made so many of us feel like we have a place in it, or as she says, it's made us all fall in love with our tradition. Benay Lappe has been honored for her work with the prestigious Covenant Award for Jewish Education, as well as appearing on just about every list of influential Jews, including the Forward's 2014 list of most inspiring rabbis and the Forward's 2020 list of the 50 most influential American Jews. Basically, if the Forward makes a list, you can bet that Benay Lappe will be on it, and deservedly so. Benay Lappe has rabbinical ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and she has served on the faculties of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Temple University, the University of Judaism, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the Graduate Theological Union's Center for Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley, and the Wexner Institute. We're always excited to talk with her in this show, and it's been too long. So Benay Lappe, welcome back to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you again.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. How long has it been? It feels like a long time. It feels like a lot has changed.
Well, that's actually where I wanted to start. It's interesting because on the one hand, we're doing these episodes where we're having some of our earliest guests on again, almost 10 years later, or a little more than 10 years later, depending on when these episodes air. But it's like, what's changed? How's your thinking changed? How's the world changed? With you, it's interesting because we've had you on a few times, not a million times, but a few times over the course of that decade. And so it's not like we haven't talked to you since that first time. And yet, I think it's worth taking that long view, almost as if we hadn't, and say, like, well, let's think about where we were in 2016, or I don't even remember, maybe we recorded those episodes in 2015, but it was a long time ago. In some ways, it was a different world. In some ways, it was the same world. And I really just kind of wanted to start there. I mean, I was thinking, as I was thinking about this, I was like, you are our first guest for us, you were a big hero. You were someone who was talking about this crash idea in all kinds of contexts, but you've become a lot more famous since then. But like we happen to have been in those talks and have been moved by what you said. But, now I feel like you say Benay Lappe to somebody, and a lot of people know who that is in a way that might not have been true 10 years ago. So that's changed. What else has changed in where you sort of see things and where we are together in this Jewish world?
Oh my goodness. It feels like so much has changed. First of all, I remember being in a room with you and a group of students at the University of Chicago giving the crash talk. And one of them said to me, "What makes you think we're in a crash?"
Yeah, that would have been like 2007, 2008, something like that.
Yeah, nobody says that anymore.
Mm.
Nobody, when I'm giving this talk and when I'm kind of describing this moment, no one is like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I think everything is fine," even if everything is fine for them. And I think you're right, as you've often said, that Judaism is not even working that well for the people for whom it's working well enough. I was saying the tradition is crashing long before a lot of people were feeling it, I think, and a lot of people are now feeling that. That's what I call the crumble. The folks who are the queerest in whatever sense of marginality they're queer, notice first, hey, this is not working for me. And I don't know if I've moved the needle on people's recognizing that it's not working that well for them, but I used to feel very alone in the option 3 world. I no
Mm.
longer feel alone in the option 3 world. And by option 3, I mean the space where we are recognizing that our tradition needs upgrading, needs fixing, and the project to be done at this moment is to try a whole bunch of things to find new Jewish practices and new Jewish ideas and new Jewish ways of organizing community. And that just didn't exist, or at least I wasn't seeing it. It didn't exist for most people when Svara started in 2003. And now, and this is really, I think, very much because of you guys, Judaism Unbound, you have mapped the option 3 ecosystem by shining a light on the folks who are just at the beginnings of creating something in option 3 land. It's become a recognizable space. And that has accelerated, I think, the possibility of folks joining them. It's very difficult to go option 3, by which I mean when your story no longer works for you to either take option 1 or option 2. Option 1, deny that it's no longer working or just leave. The only option to just leaving and staying in the game is to go to option 3. But if there's no landing spot there, it's very difficult.
Mm.
And I think what Judaism Unbound has done, especially with the book, I'm so inspired by the book because all your guests are there together. Of course, not all of them, but this book is a physical manifestation of it's a thing. It exists. There's a place we can go. You don't have to leave. There's actually a hopeful future, and it's here now. So that's one thing that I think is different. The movements are crashing, and nobody any longer, and the rabbinical schools are crashing, and no one's pretending that that's not happening anymore.
Just listening to you, I've been thinking about, and I probably have talked about this on the show before because it's one of the things that I talk about, but I'm thinking about Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. Because the idea in the Foundation trilogy is that there's this guy, he happens to be a mathematician, but he realizes that in the books, it's science fiction, the galactic empire is crashing, it's disintegrating. And it's going to take a long time for it to disintegrate. It's not happening next year. But he says if it disintegrates, there's going to be, I think, 40,000 years of misery in the galaxy. But if I can intervene in a particular way, it will only be 1,000 years. I really love the idea that 1,000 years of misery is a win, but also the methodology that this man, his name is Harry Seldon in the book, designs is that he basically designs this planet that is going to become the nucleus of the new galactic empire. And essentially, the new order starts to form around it. But actually, Asimov never finished the trilogy. I mean, he actually added a fourth book, but he never got past like 400 years or something like that of the 1,000, right? And at the end of 400 years, the Empire is still bigger than the Foundation. In other words, it's declining, but it's declining slowly. And so most people don't even recognize the decline 400 years later, and the Foundation is growing, but it's growing slowly, and people don't even recognize that 400 years later. And there's something about the way that you were describing, it's like from the perspective of you and of us who are living in this option 3 land, it is way bigger than it was 10 years ago. And one of the things that we've talked about on the show here and there, you and I have talked about it on our other show, The Oral Talmud, is there seems to be a particularly large number of people converting to Judaism into that option 3 version of Judaism. And that's not recognized by a lot of the people who are in the existing mainstream institutions. By the way, they're also experiencing significant conversion, and they're remarking on that, but I have a kind of a foot in both worlds, and it's nothing compared to what's happening in the option 3 land. And so there is this expansion, except it's profoundly recognized by the people that are in it, but we shouldn't overstate it. It's not yet the mainstream of Judaism. And, how do you kind of recognize all that and think about it? And, some people, it's interesting to hear you say a lot of people aren't asking that question of, is it crashing anymore? And yet there's a lot of people that are like, oh, my synagogue's okay.
Oh my goodness, so many things came up for me. I remember going to my first Vipassana meditation retreat, 10-day silent retreat. It was, it's very tough to sit in meditation for, 18 hours a day, whatever it is, from 4 a.m. till 9 p.m. You have your last meal at noon, and very, very difficult. I thought, I'm going to come out of this retreat, I'm going to be a whole different person. I'm going to walk through the world like, enlightenment personified. And on the last day of the retreat, the teacher, Goenka, the guru, he says, you have been in meditation now for 10 days. Before you were a meditator, you used to reel in reaction and misery. If something happened for an hour, if something bad would happen, you reeled in misery and reaction for an hour. Now you are a Vipassana meditator. Now you have spent 10 days in meditation. The 10th day is finally over. Now you'll go back into your lives. And when one of those things happen, you will reel in misery for only 59 minutes. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I've been in misery for 10 days straight, and I'm only going to get 1 minute of relief out of this. Oh my God.
From 60 to 59, that's like a very Jewish fraction in the Talmud,
Right,
1/60th of death when one sleeps, etc.
To the idea of how fast this change is happening, I actually think it's happening ridiculously fast. And it is just going to keep speeding up. When you see funders starting to fund option 3, the end is coming. The end for option 1 is coming. Now, it's not coming as quickly as I want. I'd be happier if our philanthropic partners put about 80% of their funds into option 3. Go ahead, let them spend 20% of their funds on option 1. I'm really jumping on your idea that you want option 1 to survive long enough for option 3 to thicken up and be attractive enough and fulfilling enough for the folks who were really happy in option 1 to come over. The phenomenon of who most easily populates option 3s as converts, I think is really fascinating. We are about to kick off a brand new 3-year in-depth program for creators of option 3 spaces at Spara. These are people who are doing the thing. They're either out there already doing the thing, or they want to do the thing, and they're saying we need to learn more to do that better. And 70% of our incoming class identifies as converts. It really
Yeah.
affirms for me what, Dan, you and I have been saying for years, hoping it's true, believing it's true, that converts and children of converts were those who were disproportionately not only populating, but creating option 3 2,000 years ago, what became Rabbinic Judaism, which did pretty well. These are people who are coming without the baggage of, but it doesn't look real, but this doesn't feel like it used to feel, but this doesn't seem Jewish. They're totally open. This is amazing. This is working for me. Whether it's, radically different from some other thing that looks Jewish is not disturbing to them.
I think that's such a great point. And I remember some of our early conversations about conversion, and I could envision it as a future tense something, but it did feel like the reality 10 years ago-ish when we were getting rolling was that when I thought of converts, the people that most sprang to mind were not those that were like really revved up about radically transforming Judaism. And now, yeah, our spaces are drastically disproportionately Jews by choice or converts as well. Like when I have conversations with incoming teachers and they ask, like, one of the first questions is always like, demographically, what are your students like, age-wise, politics, etc., all that. And I say that we have a broad swath of different kinds of people, but I always say two things. One, across our classes of all kinds, there are a lot of Jews by choice. That's just who ends up taking our classes. And the second thing I say, and this gets to where I'm going with the question, is disproportionately LGBTQ. Certainly when we have classes that are about queer Judaism, queer Torah, like things that are specifically, that's the subject matter, the majority of students in those rooms are LGBTQ+. Even when we're just having classes about something from the Bible or Talmud, like those classes in some cases have been majority queer, but even when they're not majority, it's like a sizable proportion of the room. I bring that up because I'm interested in your reflections on that from Svara's vantage point, but like I don't think we're that uncommon. Like I'd love to say, and I hope this is the case, I do think Judaism Unbound has been actively supportive and empowering and excited and energized about LGBTQ folks being central to our space. I think that's been from the get-go. And I don't think we're that far ahead of any number of other option 3 Jewish projects that are also disproportionately queer, because as it turns out, that's just who is around. I learned about like new up and coming Jewish musicians, and every once in a while it's like, oh, this person is straight. What an interesting, I'm not trying to joke. It's just like this has radically shifted where being a queer Jewish organization today, it feels like it's less inherently countercultural. I think you still bring a lot of countercultural pieces of your work to bear in Svara, but I guess I'd love to hear your reflections on that, because in so many ways, what it means to bring queer Talmud to the world, it's a different thing to do in 2025 than it was in 2015, when that was really like a small niche.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many pieces of this. When Svara started 22 years ago, there were very few queer folk in Jewish spaces. The really sharp queer Jews who wanted to change the world were leaving Judaism to do it. And they weren't interested in changing the Jewish world because I think no one had told them that that could happen and that they were needed and vital to that project. The best the Jewish community was saying to queer Jews was, we want to include you. That was an inclusion. And that was never good enough. Some of us settled for it a long time ago when there was no alternative, but pretty quickly after Svara started and a lot of other things began, there were alternatives, and inclusion was absolutely no longer good enough. Queerness basically crashed. For me, LGBTQ crashed and queerness was born. And from the beginning of Svara, we were defining queerness as far bigger than gender and sexuality. We were saying what it means to be queer is not only that you identify with, you don't hold the gender binary, or that you are not heterosexual. What it means to be queer is to have a profound experience of marginality, the insights from which you bring to bear on the world to make it better. That's what it means to be queer. That's essentially what people who are LGBTQ are. But that experience, that power is not limited to that form of marginality, nor is gender and sexuality the prophecy that queer people have to bring to the world. One thing I've wanted to say to queer people is what you have to bring to the world. Your prophecy is not about primarily gender and sexual orientation. It's about the profound power that comes with trusting your life experience, your svara, and saying, that tells me something that, in spite of the fact that the world tells me something very different, I'm going to march through the world with. That is your prophecy as a queer person. And then what happened in the world? I don't know. My daughter's high school graduation class was probably 60% queer identifying. Back in the day, we kind of winked when we said 1 in a million because we knew we probably weren't even 1 in 10. But that's because we also understood LGBTQ or queer very narrowly, long time ago. Young people today understand it much more broadly. That's one of the reasons why Jewish spaces that are saying Judaism is revolutionary and radical and has always deviated from and overturned its past are being populated by queer folk because they share the same profound truth.
So on the point you made about, I'm really overjoyed to hear you talk about us as, through our podcast and through our work and helping to feature folks from around the option 3 world, we've helped make it more plausible for people to hop into that world or generate something in that world themselves.
Yeah.
And it reminds me actually of Rina Yehuda Newman, the director of our certificate program in Unbound Judaism. They've been playing around with language about what Judaism Unbound is, and we've been figuring this out as an organization. And one phrase that they've used a great deal is that Judaism Unbound is a living map of the next Jewish future, or of the Jewish future. That map piece, we actually do mapping exercises in some of our cohort meetings. Rina Yehuda leads them beautifully. And the map, that's what you were getting at. What is a map at the end of the day? A map is something that is the product of people looking around at whatever area they're inhabiting and taking that, not incoherent, but not defined area, and then putting it down in a digestible format for people to be able to navigate that area, right? That's what a map is. And we do strive to be that. We try, as Judaism Unbound, ourselves to generate meaningful ideas and programming, art, many different things through our own organization. And a lot of why we exist is actually to feature those other groups and to be a kind of map mechanism. I'd love to hear more about that in terms of how you conceptualize this, because what you said before really felt like a profound piece. And I'm not asking you to do that because it just makes me feel good. It does make us feel good to hear that we're filling that role. But just, can you, as somebody familiar with our work but who is not us ourselves, help us understand maybe that function that we're serving?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in a world where people don't use maps anymore, when you get from here to there with a GPS that doesn't teach you how to look around and notice where you are in relation to anything else, right? You don't learn that skill when you don't read maps. You just follow these directions. I think we've lost our understanding of how important it is to know who's around you and who's not, and what's around you. That's one thing. The map tells you by its very existence that there's a there. Okay? So yeah. Judaism Unbound is at its core saying, hey, there's a there. There is an option 3 there. That in itself is profound. Then you're saying, let us tell you who we think is over there. Because sometimes I'm guilty of black and white thinking and drawing a line and saying, oh, okay, you're either on this side or that side, on this issue or that issue. I used to divide the Jewish world up into Yeridat Hadorot people, the people who believed that Moses was the closest to God, that we're ever going to get, and all of us subsequent to Moses is less able to suss out what God wants of us and the right way to live. And there's a strain. There has been a strain for 2,000 years of Jews saying, yeah, that's the way it works. Some people are on the left-hand side of the Yeridat Hadorot, the diminution of the generations philosophy goes. And those are the people who are saying, we don't have the right to mess with the tradition because we are so far from being able to grasp onto truth. Okay. And on the other side are the folks, and I think the tradition predominantly reflects this, that the most recent is the most reliable. The closer you are to right now, the more authority you should have. Why? Because you have been the beneficiary of everything before, and you have one thing that they never could have, which is your experience of the world. Is your project selling the Jewish product that we inherited? Getting people to observe Shabbos and Kashrut. That's what I was taught at JTS was our goal. You would be successful as an ordinary of JTS if you got lots and lots and lots of people to sign on to living Jewishly this way. On the other side of the line, I think, is the project of saying the Judaism we inherited is inadequate in a whole bunch of ways, and our job right now primarily should be to make it better. And what I think you guys are mapping, you're mapping the projects and the people who are involved in the endeavor of making Judaism better. But also the blue ocean market out there for people in the world who are looking for a system that helps them make their lives fuller, helps them become more fully human beings. We've used the shorthand of a Jewish kind of person. What if we can make it so good and so accessible and so usable to everybody that lots and lots and lots of people far beyond what we currently call our community or what we currently call Jews, that's what I'm interested in doing. That's what I think you guys are mapping out, plotting out, and to shine a light on those places and those people who are doing it helps us find them.
I'm thinking to what you were saying earlier about the prophetic role of queer folk. And it's striking me that this is a part of your option 1, option 2, option 3 dynamic that we didn't really talk about 10 years ago. And I don't think we've really talked about it ever since. And I want to try to tease it out a little bit. But I think of my wife often being scandalized when a Jew has done something unethical. And she says, how could they, and I'm talking about a religious Jew, or an identifiable Jew, somebody for whom it's clear that their Judaism matters. And she says, how could they have done this thing? I think that there are Jews for whom the ethical element of Judaism is not what they see as the Judaism that they're subscribing to. For them, it's more like, this is their team, this is their people, this is their nation. It has no ethical imperatives, or maybe not none, but the more important ethical imperatives is how do Jews take care of one another, but not necessarily how do we conduct ourselves in business. Now, you and I are scandalized by this because the Talmud is full of the other perspective, and this is just totally wrong-headed in our view, and yet we know that there's a lot of Jews that are that way. And I never made the connection before to thinking about queer folk and saying, does queerness carry with it an ethical imperative? I mean, I think a lot of people imagine that what makes somebody queer is that they're attracted to a person of the same sex, or that their gender identity is not what they were assigned at birth, or however other elements we want to define queerness. And it's not about a set of moral principles. They're like, that's a category error, right? Queerness is not like that. And yet, I think that what you were articulating was, of course it is. The thing that I'm trying to get at here is that I think that once you have the insight that you articulated about the potential prophecy of queer folk that goes beyond sexual orientation and gender identity, and that says, what from our experience do we want to bring to the whole world that has nothing to do with those things from a prophetic standpoint, I think we start to see an alternative take on the option 2 versus option 3 dynamic. Because I think the way that we usually think of option 2 is, I'm queer, Judaism doesn't have a place for me, I'm going to leave Judaism. And that's option 2. And then option 3 is somebody has a realization like, I want to come back to Judaism and somehow change Judaism so that it will be more welcoming for me in the future, and to reimagine Judaism in a certain way. And then there's a version of an option 3 that says, oh no, actually, I don't want to just have a queer Judaism. I want to bring that into Judaism, and I want to change Judaism, not for me, but for everyone else, because I have an insight that I've discovered and that I realize I want to bring back to the community to infuse into it. That it would almost be a failure to live up to your calling if you don't bring that back.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think very few queer Jewish projects see themselves as being only for queer people. Svara never did. And it always irked me to no end when a journalist would write about us and call us the LGBTQ yeshiva. Because I knew that people would misunderstand what that meant as a yeshiva for the benefit of gay people, not the yeshiva where queer people come to learn to benefit everybody, to bring something important to the Jewish world at large. I want to respond to what you were saying about queer. Is there a queer ethic? Or when you're on the margins, it's very easy to develop clarity about how to be better, because you have a front row seat, you have perspective on, and you've been at the receiving end of really bad treatment. And when you've been on the receiving end of really bad treatment, you know what bad looks like and feels like, and it's not hard to think of something better. The spaces that queer people create, which we might describe with the term queer culture, really has within it a lot of clarity about ethics, about power dynamics. It feels very different. The pedagogic beliefs that are part of Svara in the culture of every Svara space has to do with queer ethics. We don't call it that, but what queer people know. And it used to be what Jews know. When Jews were more on the margins of the world, we were a lot sharper ethically. We had a svara that the world needed that had to do with more than what kind of God you believed in and what your religion was, and whether you should be free from anti-Semitism. And I think a lot of us have lost that perspective as we've lost our place on the margins.
This feels like a really good moment to shout out my uncle Eric Rofus. I haven't cited him that much on our show, but he is my biggest influence. He is who I understand my Jewish and otherwise activism and educator role through. I'm thinking about him a lot because I was just in New York and his name is on the wall of Stonewall as one of the 50 sort of LGBTQ pioneers. And I try to go every once in a while and just like have a little bit of a reflection moment. And I was just there. And when he died in 2006, he was in the midst of writing something, a book that ended up being called Thriving. Some friends of his finished it after he died. And really the first chapter, which he wrote himself before he died, he wrote the first couple chapters, Desires as Defiance, Gay Male Sexual Subjectivities and Resistance to Sexual Health Promotion. So he saw and wrote a lot about how part of what is important to, for him, gay men specifically, but also for the broader LGBTQ world that he was part of, I would use the word, he didn't that much, the word antinomianism, a relationship to transgression, not as the big problem of society, but as something that sustains society. He wore leather a lot. He was a leather daddy, and very publicly so. And he literally would give testimony in court wearing his leather. as a way of saying, you know what, like there is actually a way that being gay, being queer is not about looking like everybody else, having having the sexual relationships of everybody else, having the norms around monogamy, or like, and I bring that up because this question around, is there a queer ethic? The ways he answered that with a profound yes have been under the surface part of why I am so passionate around Judaism Unbound, having the relationship we have to transgression, to heresy, as not a negative. I mean, it's funny, Jay Michelson, another wonderful frequent guest of ours who is also in the LGBTQ world, he's the person we've most regularly spoken with about the magic of Jewish heresy. I don't think that's an accident. And so I guess I'm curious, on so many fronts, you both have talked about how teachings from the queer world have the ability to move people who are cisgender, who are heterosexual. And you were even just getting to that. I guess I'm curious, like, are we at a stage, option 3-wise, Jewishly, where that relationship to transgression, that relationship to questioning norms, to understanding status quo not as sort of correct until proven guilty, is that part of the world we're inhabiting now after these 10 years? It seems to me like the collective option 3 relationship to transgression has changed. It seems like today I more often see people like actively saying, yeah, I am radical, I'm a heretic, some like those kinds of things. But I'm curious your read on it.
Two thoughts. First, I don't think there is a single queer ethic. I think there is a queer orientation of skepticism and willingness to, more than a willingness, an investment in examining whether that which is accepted as true and good and right is actually so. And I think we've matured. I came out 45 or so years ago, and the attitude of questioning then what went on in the heteronormative world was, if straight people did it, it was bad. Not, let's look at what straight people do and see it. Is this good? No, if straight people did it, it was bad. So monogamy, straight people did it. Monogamy was bad. Having sex this way, straight people do it. No, it's bad. We're not going to, we can't do it that way because it's bad, because that's what straight people do. And I think the queer orientation is like what used to be the Jewish orientation, which is a willingness to examine and say, does this work well? Is this helping me be a more fully human being? Is this leaving out my experience? Does it leave out somebody else's experience? Who am I not seeing here? I was teaching yesterday how to read Rashi, and I realized that Rashi's, on one level, Rashi's there to help you get clarity on a text that you're confused about. But on a more meta level, having this imagined perfect understander of this opaque text helps me in two ways. Number one, helps me know that if I'm confused, I'm going to get help in being not confused. But even more importantly, this imagined perfect understander is there to help me realize when I don't know that I'm confused, but I should be, that I need to be. That when I think I have it right, when I think everything, the way I think of it is clear and complete and absolutely right, that person's going to say, I know you think you got it right. You actually didn't realize that it's much more complex than that. So at the end of the day, the queer prophecy is to be always willing to say, is this norm working? Who's it not working for? And how can we make it better?
So on a practical level, before we go, I'd love to have a chance to talk to you about some of the more recent projects you're doing or the more recent thinking you're doing. You talked about this new project about people studying for 3 years and becoming, and then you kind of trailed off. You said becoming whatever they're going to become. And I'd love to learn more about that. You and I have talked about this idea that you have called the Daf Shnati, which is alternative to the Daf Yomi, which is the practice of reading 1 page of Talmud every day. And the Daf Shnati is something very different. And I'd love to understand some of these projects that you're working on, but also why. Inherent in these projects, I think, is a very deep claim about what Judaism is trying to do, or what's the best way to be a Jewish community that manifests in a project. So I'd love to hear what you're working on and why.
Oh my goodness. First of all, I've thought a lot about how when you're a founder, you have dreams and you have a vision. Then you create an organization to put that out into the world. And at a certain point, you get caught in the organization. Organizations need to grow, and they need to have systems and infrastructure, and there needs to be a certain stability in the growth. And you can't every day, the way I would like to say, wait, I got a new idea. Let's do this. It's very hard for founders. And I've been feeling that over the years. But we're at a moment in Svara where we don't need to grow anymore, because the first phase of our project is over. And the first phase of the project was putting out there and like changing the weather on Judaism, on the Talmud, getting out into the world the idea that Judaism is smart, radical, it trusts us. It's always been radically changing. And the most Jewish thing about Judaism is that methodology for change. And we got a big team on the field in our first 20 years. And now we get to say, okay, let's go deep with a few of you. And I used to think that the more people who came into our yeshiva, the better. And success would look like thousands and thousands and thousands of people learning in our yeshiva. And I have a different idea of what success looks like now. Now it's not how many people can get into the yeshiva, it's how many people can we get out of the yeshiva? How many people can we teach this spiritual technology of learning Talmud to, and then get them out into the world in their lives doing that as a spiritual practice? This project of Daf Shinati, learning a page of Talmud over the course of a year, is a project to make it possible for people who aren't going to join a 12-week class, who want the most powerful form of the practice, which is not, here, learn these 3 lines, come back, keep the pace of the teacher, keep the pace of the class, but really learn at the speed of their own truth, learn at the speed of how far they and their chavruta can go. And you actually don't need to be in a yeshiva to do that. You need to know a method of learning. That's as far method. We need to teach you that. Okay. But then you can go and do it. So we are thinking of a variety of ways to help people get out of the yeshiva and bring Talmud study into their lives the way people bring yoga into their lives, and they may not be going to a yoga studio.
But there's another part of Daf Shnati that I just really love so much, how you talk about it, is that Daf Yomi, the idea of reading a page of Talmud every day, the achievement at the end of that process is that I, one person, have read the whole Talmud. Whatever the value of that may be, it's a debate for another day. We've had it on our show, The Oral Talmud, so people can tune into that. But I love the idea that you talk about. Imagine an alternative, that the entire Talmud was read every year, but collectively by the Jewish people or by a subsegment of the Jewish people. That, to me, is a beautiful image. And, you've talked about each person says, I'm going to take responsibility for this page. And everybody is kind of doing their part. I love that too, right? A lot of times in our world today, we're overwhelmed by the notion that we're not doing enough, that there's so many things going wrong, and I'm not doing enough. And the truth is that you could do as much as you possibly could, and it would still be terrible because you're just one person. But the idea that we can do something collectively, maybe that would help. And it's such a different reframe of the idea of like covering the whole Talmud, that I just think there's something extremely deep in it.
Dan, you mentioned this collective holding, and that's absolutely part of the vision of this Daf Shinati project. But the critical part of the collective holding isn't just the idea that we hold the entirety of the Talmudic tradition together and that we need one another, but that we then teach it to each other. Right? You remember the text that I'm still so obsessed with, the Rabbi Hanina text, where Rabbi Chia takes the Torah that he has created with his own hands, and he goes to a town, and to each of five children, he teaches one book of the Torah, and to each of 6 other children, one book of the Mishnah. And then he says, now teach each other. I'm going to leave. That's the process that will be to thank for the fact that if we do that, Torah will never disappear from the world. There's something in that dynamic of, this is mine, I have a piece of this, and I have learned it and integrated it into my life. And now it's different because of who I am. And you need me to get that piece. And the piece you're going to get is a different piece than the piece that Rabbi Chia taught me, because of who I am. And I need your piece, and the piece you're going to give to me is going to be different because of who you are, and on and on and on. And Rabbi Chia knows that Torah is going to be radically different by the 3rd round of this method, but that's precisely how Torah stays alive.
I think that's a really good point. What's funny is, like, I figure you both might have talked about this when it came up on Oral Talmud, but like, we do have that modality. Often in traditional communities, when somebody dies, there's a tradition of collectively learning a section of Mishnah, or like you split up the chapters, or you split, like, whatever it might be. That's something people do in a really important moment, which is a moment of grief and collective grief. And somehow we don't look at that and be like, oh, that's actually good, not just for after people die. I'm really about that, and I think maybe we as an organization can find ways to experiment with that in the future. But I wanted to make sure before we close, this will be our last question, but on our 500th episode, Dan and I became the guests a little bit, and Miriam hosted, and we had the pleasure of talking about how we met and our love for one another. And I really want to give the two of y'all that chance too, because I mean, for some of our people, they know Oral Talmud very well, and they've seen your interactions. For others, they might just know you from Benay, your experiences as a guest on this show, and when we've been a little snippet of that. I think that the relationship between the two of you has actually been a really pivotal piece of our organizations, and hopefully both organizations' work. And so I'd love to hear a little bit of that as we close, just how you connected and what you love about one another.
I could talk about that for a long time.
So I want to see your Talmud story and raise you another Talmud story, because that I think is kind of at the heart of Lex's question, which is that there's a story in the Talmud that we talk about at length on the Oral Talmud, not on the episodes that have come out as a podcast yet. You have that to look forward to. There are these video episodes that it started on, and we're now converting those to a podcast. But we spent a number of weeks on this story of the relationship between two rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And there's a queer relationship at the heart of it, or potentially a queer relationship at the heart of it. It's a wonderful set of stories that I can't summarize here, but these were two study partners. This is the part of the story that I'll summarize. These were two study partners, and then one of them, Reish Lakish, died. And they brought Rabbi Yochanan a replacement study partner, a man named Elazar ben Padat. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't like studying with him, because he said that all you do, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, is that when I say something, you just tell me a bunch of sources that support me. You say there's a source that supports you, and you're just kind of a kiss up, like a yes man. They're just telling me how brilliant I am. But when Reish Lakish was my study partner and I would say something, he would bring all these arguments against me. And because of that, the tension in that relationship, the fact that he was not always saying how brilliant I am, the tradition became deeper and broader and wider and better. And I'm reflecting on our study partnership, and it's not like that, right? We don't bring counter arguments to one another very often. But we're also not just kissing up to one another. I think it's like some version of appreciative inquiry, or it's something that says, I think you're brilliant, and you're even more brilliant than you knew that you were, because here's what I see and what you said that you didn't even see. And I think that that's actually a different, valuable way of studying together that at least that particular Talmud text maybe didn't see, didn't talk about. But to me, that's the nature of our relationship on the show, on the Oral Talmud, but also in life. And also, I think, in our organizations. I think we've said to each other, I see something in your organization that maybe you're not even seeing, and vice versa. So that's like one way that I see it. And I don't know if there's a Talmud text for that, but it's I see it as a gloss on the Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish text.
I love that. And now you're bringing to my mind what you remind me of all the time, which is our project can't be learning the Talmud that has been, but creating the Talmud that needs to be. That story of you and me teaches a different way to be chavrutas, a way that points out to each other parts of ourselves that we don't realize, not in an adversarial, challenging way. I'm not even sure what the magic is that you and I have, other than we love each other. We think one another is really smart. And that for me has been because I don't think I'm really that smart. And I have a lot of insecurities. But if someone like you thinks I'm smart, it brings out more smartness than either I thought I had or that I really had.
It's funny because I was just listening to an episode of the Oral Talmud the other day. And I was probably walking my dog, I was walking in the alley, but I was listening to you talk, and I literally stopped and I was like, what a blessing to live in a time where Benay Lappe is alive.
Aww.
Nobody else could have said what you said. And then I think how you say you don't think you're a scholar and you don't think you're smart. I'm like, I don't remember. I wish I could remember right now what it was and I could say it back to you. But it was the most profound thing.
That's what we all need. We all need the chavruta who thinks we are the smartest thing in the world, who thinks, thank God I'm in the generation with that person. I mean, I think that's a new definition of chavruta. Thank you, Dan. Oh my goodness. And I feel exactly the same way.
Wow. I love the two of you, both of you separately, but I also love the chavruta that you are together. I don't have as deep a take on the magic that is the two of you because I'm not either one of you, but as an outside observer of it and somebody who's listened to Oral Talmud and somebody who's just been in conversation with the two of you, there is a magic that arises. There's a chemistry in like the chemical reaction sense, something bigger that magnifies the smartness that both of you absolutely have. There's an additive element that the two of you bring together that it's really fun to share this space with the two of you. But Benay, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thank you both.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. As we close, a couple reminders. First, if you really vibed with the description Benay gave about Daf Shanati instead of Daf Yomi, the idea of a Talmud page learned over the course of an entire year by somebody and then taught by different people. One person learns one, another person learns another. That's something you can totally learn more about by heading to Sfara's website. We also have something that resembles it in certain ways, which is our Shabbat Unbound initiative, where we're prioritizing depth over breadth as well, taking the time each month to hone in on one prayer as opposed to all of the Shabbat liturgy. And so Shabbat Unbound is our year-long Shabbat service, and we hope that you will experience it. You can sign up at JudaismUnbound.com/Shabbat. Our next gathering, as we release this episode, is in November, but there will be one in December, January, every month, moving on through the end of this year. And so we hope that you will join us. Also, this is a great opportunity to shout out our book, Judaism Unbound Bound. Benay Lappe plays a prominent role in it. So check out the book. Head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com/book, where you can purchase the book and also the experience guide, which is a way for you to have all sorts of creative modalities for applying the book to your life, doing activities, having questions for consideration, all of that good stuff. So we hope that you will consider that. Again, JudaismUnbound.com/book. The last thing we'll say is that we're so deeply grateful when you reach out to us with your questions, your ideas, your visions. All of that is super welcome, and you can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, there's our website, JudaismUnbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and all sorts of other goodies. And you can also email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. We'd also be so grateful to any of you out there who are interested in supporting us financially with either a one-time gift or a recurring donation. You can support us in either of those ways by heading to judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.